Alright guys, BLM here, back with a new video. In this video, since I finally caught up on The Circle, at least with the Netflix series, I thought it would be fun to do a casting video for The Circle All-Stars. Now, obviously this is something that is never going to happen. I think, first up, just a Circle All-Star season in general is something that will probably never happen. It's very tough to even imagine how that will happen, let alone doing one using people from all different countries. Like, it just doesn't make sense. But I think it'll be fun to do this video anyway. I just think it'll be fun to talk about these characters. Yes, I know this will never happen, but what I want to do here is essentially make a 15-person cast for the Circle All-Stars using people from all 5 series of the Circle so far. That being the 2 UK series, the US series, the Brazilian series, and the French series. Which again, there's a bevy of reasons why this will never happen. One, there's rights issues with the UK versions and the Netflix versions. There's issues with just the concept of an all-star season in general for the Circle. There's also language issues. And all these things are reasons why this will never happen. But I think it'll be fun to create an all-star cast here anyway. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go through each of the seasons of the Circle so far. And essentially from each of these seasons, I'm going to select 3 people that I feel like would be fun to see on an all-star season. Now, full disclosure, I did not really bother trying to even up the genders on this cast because the Circle's always had wonky stuff of gender, and also because people can catfish as other genders. It just really makes it really tough to balance that sort of thing out. So I just decided, why even try? Let's go through each series, starting off with Season 1 of the UK. Season 1 of the UK, and to pick 3 people from this cast I'd like to see again was kind of tough. I mean, there's some people that I think would be a lot of fun. I considered Alex the winner of the season, who played as Kate, who's obviously the fan favorite of that season, someone that was very well liked. But really, I don't feel like they brought the best TV, especially towards the later half of that season. I feel like Alex just kind of lost steam, and because he didn't make my cut. I did consider Scotty and Precious, 2 people who brought a lot of drama to the Circle, but I just felt like there were 3 better options. So let's just go through the people that made the cut for me. So first up, I think this one was a lock. I don't think you can have an all-star season using UK players of the Circle without having Freddie. And Freddie's just such an incredible reality TV character with his outbursts, his temper tantrums, his screaming, like just everything about him is just really, really fun. But also, he's a really savvy game player as well. I mean, out of anyone on that season, he definitely tried to play the game the most. Now, did all of his decisions actively help him in the game? Not necessarily, but I think he at least tried to play the game in a strategic way. So I think having him back would be a lot of fun. I also ended up putting on Sean from this season, obviously the 3rd place finisher. I just think she's a likable presence on that season. I think she's someone that did get into some conflict. She was someone that acted genuinely most of the time. And I think just her just being a naturally likable person, and her also being pretty different from the rest of the women that I ended up putting on the cast. I just felt like she was a pretty good pick for the cast here. And the last person from this season I put on, again, another one of the bigger figures from this season, I put Dan. For me, whenever I think of this season, I mean, the 2 people I think of are Freddie and Dan. And again, while Dan isn't the most dynamic character out of the bunch, I think he's someone that was a very memorable character from this season. Was another one that wasn't afraid to get into confrontations. He was someone that mostly played a loyal game. I mean, there were points where he would play a bit deceivously, but overall, again, he's just one of the more memorable characters on the season for me, so I just thought he was a pretty easy pick there. Now moving on to UK Season 2, which didn't really have that many other considerations. I mean, I think the 3 people from that season were pretty much locked for me, though I did consider Brooke, who was an earlier boot on that season, but I thought was one of the more interesting early boots, but again, didn't really make the cut. Considered Ella, someone who did make it pretty far, and was someone that was poised to win the game if she got to the end, but again, didn't make the cut. I considered Woody, who really just wasn't as big of a character as the top 3 that made the cut for me, so he didn't make it. I considered Patty the winner, but for me, again, the top 3 here from this season were pretty locked in. So the people I put on the cast from UK Season 2 are Georgina, who's the 2nd place finisher, again, someone that was pretty feisty, someone that, again, wasn't willing to hide back from confrontation, but also someone that I think played pretty well strategically. I mean, she was willing to play strategically during that end game, building that alliance with Sammy and Patty that really allowed them to run the table there. And coming to that finale, I mean, she was in a very good position to win the game. Now, she's no strategic mastermind by any means, but I do think seeing her return to the circle would be a pretty fun prospect, so she made the cut there. I also considered probably one of the biggest characters in the history of the circle up to this point, and that is Tim. I mean, I don't see how you do any sort of all-star season for the circle and don't have Tim on there either. I mean, Tim is pretty much Robin Williams, and to have that person on reality TV is just hilarious. But I also feel like if he were to play again, I get the sense that he would play slightly differently. I do have the sense that he would play a bit more strategically. If he were to return, I feel like that would be interesting to see as well. And the last person from Circle UK Season 2 that I put on the cast was James, also known as Sammy. Again, another one of the bigger figures of that season. This really kind of generic guy that was playing as a single mother. And that brought a lot of fun to the show. I mean, there aren't really that many catfish that I selected for this cast here, but I feel like if I were to pick a catfish, I mean, I feel like he had to be one of them. Again, probably have one of the biggest impacts on the season as a whole, especially in that end game. If it wasn't for him ringing in Georgina and Patty, more than likely Ella or Tim win that season. And I think him, along with the other catfish that I ended up putting on the cast, might have played the game the best, optimally, like towards the end game. And while that didn't reward him with the win, it definitely rewarded someone within his alliance to win. I think that's something you have to at least give him credit for, especially with how high variance that final round of the circle seems to be. Now moving on to the Circle US, which I know people might disagree because I've seen a lot of hate towards the Circle US, but I personally love this cast. I mean, really, I think almost anyone from this cast can come back on a future season and it would be a lot of fun, especially a lot of the original players. I mean, Alana, Antonio, Karen. I think all three of those early boots were really, really fun characters and people I wouldn't mind seeing again, but they didn't make my cut, obviously. Even some of the newer players and Alex and Miranda brought a lot to the season as well. I did also consider Chris and Seaburn, two of the finalists as well, but they just didn't make the cut for me. But for me, the three people that made the cut, I mean, spoiler, are the final three, but let's talk about them in order. Let's talk about Joey. And Joey's actually the only winner I decided to put on my cast. And the reason for that is I just feel like you can't have an all-star season without Joey. I feel like Joey, again, is another one of the best characters in the Circle. I think when looking at the Circle UK Season 1, I think you think of Freddie. UK Season 2, you think of Tim. Circle US, for me, I look at Joey. I think Joey is the most memorable character there. I think he is just a really memorable figure for the show. Now, do I think he would return? Probably not, to be honest. I don't see how incentivized he is to play the Circle again if they were to do something like this. But I think it'll be a lot of fun to see him play. So I put him on. I also put on Shubham or Shuby. And I've seen some hate for Shuby online recently with a lot of people kind of going against him, obviously stating that how social media is like the devil and stuff, yet he's now using social media a lot, which, I mean, I fully get. I mean, I fully get that, but I still found him to be a fun character at points. He's really naive, and that led to some fun moments. And he's a fan of shows like Survivor and Big Brother, so I do think if the Circle were to turn into this very strategic game, I do feel like Shuby would be able to adapt to that sort of game. So I felt like Shuby was a good fit for this cast. And the last person I put on was Sammy, third place finisher on that season. And I mean, Sammy, I just think is another kind of similar figure to Georgina for me. A more sassy sort of figure, someone that's very open with the audience and isn't afraid to get into confrontations. Mind you, I think the Circle US was really just a cast that actually liked each other for the most part. I feel like that was kind of the biggest issue with the season as a whole, is just how friendly everyone was to each other. But I think if you get her into a cast with more people that don't like each other, I think it would be a lot more interesting. And she was also the fan favorite on the season, so I mean, why not? I would put Sammy on an all-star cast as well. Now moving on to the Circle Brazil, and from the Circle Brazil, I considered a decent amount of people actually. I mean, I considered Marina the winner of the season, but for me, I just felt like there were better options than her. I considered Raf, as I just found them pretty funny. I really liked his commentary on the game and how he would react to things, but again, I just felt like there were better options. I considered Akel, because I think Akel's someone that was very openly strategic in the game, but he was kind of an early boot, so that kind of made it kind of tough to put him on the actual cast. And also considered Gable, who was another really early boot. And if I did decide to put more people from this cast on the cast, he probably would have been more in consideration, but it really wasn't in the cards. So the three people from the Circle Brazil that I did put on the cast, I did put on JP, the third place finisher from that season, and I really loved JP on this season. It's really weird because like he started off being this really big douchebag, and I really didn't care for him. But as time went on, I felt like he opened up as a character. I thought he became a pretty funny character, just watching the way he would talk and the way he would express himself. But then also, he played a very strategic game. I mean, he was able to pick up the outsiders and pretty much ran the table. And if it wasn't for how strategic the cast was during the final voting, I do think there's a very good chance that JP could have won that season. So he's someone that I would like to see on a return. I also did put on Dumaresque, as again, I feel like Dumaresque is probably the most memorable character from the Circle Brazil. And again, that was kind of my biggest issue with the Circle Brazil as a whole, though, is I didn't feel like there was one major standout from the season, but I feel like if there was one, it would be Dumaresque. He was a fun character at points. He did play the game strategically. I do feel like he got a bit too emotional at points and kind of came off as kind of rude at points, but for the most part, I did find him pretty fun, so I put him on the cast. And the other person I put on the cast is, again, another one of these women that I just feel like are pretty similar, but they're usually my favorite type of players on the circle. And kind of similar to Sammy and Georgina, I have Lorraine. And I feel like Lorraine's another one of these more like really strong women to be on the circle. And mind you, I think she played the game a lot differently than Georgina and Sammy. I think she's the same sort of character, but I think she played the game a lot more aggressively and probably a bit more personally. I think she was very much into saving Akel, which ended up ruining her game and her relationships with like Marina and Dumaresque, and because that becomes a massive target, gets taken out mid-game. But for me, I really liked her presence on that season, so I decided to put her on my cast as well. Now from the Circle France, the final series we're going to be talking about, and there were so many considerations here. I mean, again, this is another cast that I think is fantastic. I think almost the entire cast is worth bringing back. But because that became very tough to select who would come back. Because I think when you think of 3 people from the Circle France, you think of Team Winner. Think of Romain, Alea, and Maxime. And it's like, I wanted to bring them all back, but it also just felt unfair to have 3 people that were all in Alliance being the only 3 people from the Circle France to return from the season. It just didn't feel right. So because I did make a rule that I was only going to bring back one of them. And because of that, I did have to cut both Alea and Romain. Romain's another one, just like Joey, that I think was a massive figure on the season, really fun character, but was also the winner of that season. But I feel like we already had Joey. Do we need both Joey and Romain? 2 people who I felt like were very similar archetype-wise. So I decided that was enough reason to leave Romain off. Alea was just kind of someone that was just kind of fine to me. I mean, she was likable on the season, but really wasn't super memorable outside of her allegiance to Team Winner. So I thought it was okay to leave her off as well. I did consider the twins that ended up playing as Nalea. I felt like Nalea was, again, another fun presence on the season. But for me, I kind of wanted to have an earlier boot on the seasons. That's why they didn't make the cut. I thought Paolo was a really interesting figure on the season as well. I thought he actually played pretty strategically. And someone that I think had a lot of potential in the game if he came in right from the beginning, but he just didn't make the cut. So the people that I did put on the cast start off with the other member of Team Winner that I didn't talk about, and that is Maxime, who did come in playing as Valeria, but I think he really played one of the most optimal games of the circle. I mean, he did make a few missteps here and there, but I think for the most part, he probably played one of the best strategic games in the history of the circle up to this point. Where strategically, I felt like he always knew how to maneuver. I think he knew who he needed to get out to optimize his chances of winning at the end. I think the problem is that I just don't think he was ever going to win at the end. I think when against Alea and Romain, who were more likable in the end game, I just felt like there was no way he was really ever going to win. But still, he was also a great character at times as well, and really just overall, I just felt like he needed to be on an all-star season. I also brought back Ines, as Ines for me was some wasted potential on that season. I mean, kind of similar to Lorraine, where I felt like she made some pretty big strategic missteps, and that made her eventually get targeted. I think she has a lot of potential in the game. She has probably more potential in the game than Lorraine, where Lorraine really isolated herself with one person, while Ines had that alliance with Cedric and Gary, and even when Cedric and Gary left, she was able to rebuild alliances with Nalia and Paolo, and she was pretty close to orchestrating that resistance there, so I do think she would be an interesting player to see back on an all-star season. And the last person on the cast here, I think this one was kind of an obvious pick if I was going to put back a person that was an early boot. And for me, the best early boot in the history of Circle is probably Cedric. I mean, Cedric is someone that just dominated the airtime on that season up to that point, with him playing one of the most strategic games we've seen on the Circle, especially one of the most outwardly strategic games we've seen on the Circle. The problem is that almost everyone knew he was playing a strategic game, and through that, it just made him such a massive target. But again, I think seeing him play the circle again would be really fascinating. So for me, of all the early boots, I felt like he was the one that needed to make the cut. There we go. That is my cast for Circle All-Stars. Let's go through it. From UK Season 1, I have Freddie, Sean, and Dan. From UK Season 2, I have Georgina, Tim, and James. From the Circle US, I have Joey, Shubham, and Sammy. From the Circle Brazil, I have JP, Dumaresque, and Lorraine. And from the Circle France, I have Maxime, I have Ines, and I have Cedric. Now again, I'll say this again, I know this will never happen. There's no way this will ever happen, this sort of international circle season. If anything, I mean, maybe they could do a US, Brazil, and France one, since that is all Netflix, like Netflix related. I feel like they could get that together. Or I do see down the line, maybe if they can find out a way to do a Circle All-Star season, they could do a UK series down the road. But realistically, all these shows coming together will probably never ever happen. But I did think this was a fun way to kind of talk about a lot of these characters that I would personally like to see play the Circle again. But there we go. That is my cast for the Circle All-Stars. Thank you for watching.